Ever feel like you're juggling, I don't know, a million things and just need the essential insights on something complex delivered straight? Today, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, we're diving in.
We're tackling a really persistent problem worldwide. Why clinical teaching in health professions education keeps getting undervalued, even though everyone agrees it's, well, crucial.
Right. It's not exactly a new observation, is it? I mean, for years, people have recognized that clinical teachers are just key in shaping future doctors, nurses, all the healthcare pros.
Uh-huh.
And, institutions have put a lot into things like faculty development, new career paths.
Yeah, lots of effort.
But the feeling remains, it seems, that teaching doesn't always get quite the same respect as, say, research or clinical practice.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because it really does seem like all these efforts haven't quite hit the mark.
Hmm.
The sources we're looking at today suggest that, yeah, teaching achievements still aren't always seen as equal to clinical service or research, and that can have a real knock-on effect, right?
Absolutely. Potentially leading to less engaged teachers and ultimately maybe a dip in the quality of education for learners.
Yeah, exactly. And this deep dive looks at the issue from a slightly different angle. Instead of just hearing from the clinical teachers themselves, which is important, we're focusing on the people managing the educational system,
The leaders.
the organizational leaders, yeah, the ones setting policies and practices. Our goal today for you listening is to really dig into the underlying systemic reasons for this problem, and we're doing that by looking at a recent study that compared two medical schools internationally.
Right. So we've got to look at two specific institutions. There's one in Singapore called Site 1 in the study. It's a younger school, less than 15 years old.
Relatively new, yeah.
And then Site 2 in Canada, which has been around much longer, something like 80 years.
Established.
Yeah. And the researchers spoke with 23 leaders across both sites and also analyzed 24 public documents. So a pretty solid amount of material to get into. It is. And what the study reveals is, well, it's a mix. Some expected similarities, sure, but also some quite interesting differences in how these leaders think about support and reward good teaching and, importantly, the hurdles they run into.
Okay.
Let's maybe start by looking at their fundamental ideas about what makes clinical teaching excellent in the first place.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting straight away. It appears that the leaders at Site 1, the newer school in Singapore, they tended to really focus on the more technical side of teaching.
Technical how?
Well, things like having a good grasp of different teaching methods, different pedagogical approaches, ways of explaining things or running a session, and just being able to deliver the content effectively, that sort of thing.
Right, the mechanics of teaching.
Yeah.
Which makes sense perhaps for a newer place. But what's also notable is the contrast with Site 2 in Canada.
Huh?
Their leaders certainly valued those technical skills, absolutely, but they seem to put just as much weight on interpersonal skills, how teachers actually interact with students, and also on personal qualities.
Like what?
Like having a genuine intrinsic passion for teaching, creating a supportive learning environment, that kind of thing.
That's a broader view. It does make you wonder if a newer institution, like you said, maybe needs to focus on establishing those core technical competencies first.
Possibly. Whereas a more established one might have the bandwidth or the history to consider these broader qualities more from the outset.
And how might that difference impact the overall learning experience for students? That's a key question.
Definitely.
And that difference in what they emphasize seemed to influence how they actually measured teaching excellence, too. At Site 1, a really key metric was apparently the sheer number of hours a clinician spent teaching.
Just the time put in, which, is measurable, but...
Well, maybe not the whole picture.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Site 2 took a broader perspective. They looked at whether teachers were using innovative methods in their teaching, if they were contributing to the scholarship of education, maybe publishing about their teaching approaches.
Oh, interesting.
And even their national reputation in their field. It suggests a perhaps more mature system looking beyond just the raw time commitment.
That makes sense. And another significant difference was in how they actually evaluated their clinical teachers. Site 2 had a much more formalized and regular system for appraisals.
Right, systematic reviews.
Yeah. This brings up an important point about the structure of these evaluations, doesn't it? At Site 1, it sounds like formal appraisals weren't nearly as common. Many teachers were only evaluated more informally or maybe just ad hoc when a specific need arose. One leader there even expressed a wish for, and this is a quote, one proper system that can capture everything readily.
Wow. That really highlights a potential gap, doesn't it? in providing consistent feedback and, identifying areas for growth or even excellence.
Definitely. But interestingly, it wasn't all different. It seems neither site had a really clear, explicit, written down definition of what exactly excellent clinical teaching looked like.
No formal definition.
No. Instead, they both seem to rely on these more general descriptions and sort of lists of things they would consider, metrics maybe.
And a key similarity, which came up earlier, was the importance of positive feedback from learners. Student evaluations.
Ah, yes.
Both sites really paid attention to those when they were making decisions about recognizing and rewarding their clinical teachers. So what students thought really carried weight, it seems, in how teaching was valued, at least for rewards.
Okay. So shifting gears a bit, how did each site actually support and recognize teaching? We saw some interesting contrasts there too, didn't we? Particularly in their core training requirements for teachers.
Yeah, the philosophies seemed different. At Site 1 in Singapore, most clinical teachers weren't actually required to undergo core faculty development training after they were appointed.
Oh, why was that?
Well, the reasoning given was that the healthcare institutions themselves, the hospitals, often had their own mandatory training courses that people had to do anyway.
I see. So it was happening elsewhere, maybe?
Perhaps. Whereas at Site 2, the Canadian school, it was generally a requirement for most clinicians who had teaching responsibilities to complete core training during their initial orientation.
So built in from the start. That suggests a more proactive, maybe more standardized approach to ensuring a baseline level of teaching skills across the board.
Seems like it. And it also appeared that the opportunities for more formal recognition and rewards differed quite a bit.
How so?
Well, Site 2 seemed to have more teaching awards available, just a higher volume maybe, and perhaps clearer pathways for promotion that specifically acknowledged contributions to teaching.
Right. And you have to wonder, don't you, if having those visible rewards helps to signal the value the institution places on teaching. Makes it more tangible.
Exactly. It sends a message. Yeah.
But despite these differences in the formal requirements and maybe the number of rewards, both schools did offer optional faculty development workshops and courses throughout the year, things people could choose to do.
Yeah, ongoing opportunities. And they both provided resources like financial support to allow clinicians to have dedicated, protected time for teaching activities away from clinical duties.
Which is crucial, getting that protected time.
Absolutely essential. And when it came to the types of rewards offered, both used those external forms we mentioned, teaching awards, promotion,
Yeah.
but also recognized the importance of more intrinsic rewards. Like offering prestigious titles, or just the general professional respect and prestige that comes with being known as a really good teacher.
Right, that internal satisfaction and peer recognition. Okay. Now, let's dig into the actual challenges these sites faced. When it came to assessing, supporting, recognizing good teaching, this is where we can really see some of the underlying systemic issues, I think.
Definitely. And looking at the leaders' perspectives, those at Site 1, the newer school, seemed to really focus on challenges related to structure and process.
Okay, what kind of things?
Things like not having clear enough criteria for what constitutes excellent teaching, problems with how evaluation and feedback were actually done, and a promotion process that felt slow, maybe opaque, difficult to navigate.
Process issues.
Yeah. One Site 1 leader really emphasized the need for clear promotion criteria, saying, quote, "If you make it clear, then I think people have no dispute."
That really highlights the importance of having transparent, well-defined systems, doesn't it? If people don't know the rules of the game, it's hard to play.
Precisely. Interestingly, though, leaders at Site 2 seemed less concerned about these specific structural issues, maybe suggesting their systems were, more established or perceived as clearer.
Possibly.
Instead, they pointed more towards cultural factors that led to misunderstandings about the support available and the overall importance placed on clinical teaching.
Culture. Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, what's particularly noteworthy is this reported disconnect at Site 2 between the medical school, the university part, and the clinical departments and teachers who were primarily working in the affiliated hospitals.
Ah, the classic town gown issue, almost. University versus hospital.
Kind of. Several leaders at Site 2, particularly those based in the medical school itself, felt that there was misinformation, maybe negative perceptions circulating within the hospitals about the support and rewards actually available for teaching. Like the message wasn't getting through or was getting distorted.
And did it go the other way?
It seemed to. Some leaders, mainly from the hospital side at Site 2, felt that clinical teachers identified more strongly with their clinical departments in their hospitals than with the medical school itself. Their primary loyalty was perhaps to the clinical setting.
Right.
We even heard about a department chair at Site 2 who was worried about their members primarily aligning with the teaching hospital, feeling that connection more strongly.
Yeah.
And an assistant dean who felt the Faculty of Medicine wasn't clearly conveying a strong enough sense of belonging to those clinical teachers based in the hospitals.
Wow. That potential split, that fractured relationship could definitely create challenges in fostering a unified approach to valuing and supporting teaching excellence, couldn't it?
Absolutely. It seems like a significant cultural hurdle at Site 2, something that wasn't really raised as a major concern at Site 1.
Interesting. And this cultural difference also showed up in how they viewed rewards, didn't it?
It really did. Leaders at Site 1 generally felt that there weren't enough teaching awards and not enough opportunities for promotion based primarily on teaching excellence, a sense of scarcity.
Okay. Whereas Site 2,
Quite strikingly, over half of the Site 2 leaders believed there were actually enough rewards. One even joked, apparently, we have enough awards to sink a ship.
enough awards to sink a ship. That's
Yeah.
that's a pretty big difference in perception right there. Wow.
Huge difference. Another key difference that emerged was in how the two sites viewed individual responsibility in all this. Nearly half of the Site 2 leaders, and these were all from the medical school side, pointed to factors like a perceived lack of motivation, or maybe a lack of individual responsibility among clinical teachers to actually engage with updates, professional development, and work on actively improving their teaching.
So sort of putting the onus on the individual teachers?
It leans that way in those comments, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a very different perspective compared to Site 1.
Right, where the leaders seemed more focused on the shortcomings of the organization, the structures, the processes as the main drivers of these issues, rather than blaming individual teachers.
Exactly, a focus on system versus individual. But despite all these contrasts, there were definitely some shared challenges too.
Like what?
Well, communication between the medical school and the teaching hospitals was flagged as an issue at both sites to some extent, leading to gaps in awareness about how teaching excellence was being measured, what support was really available, and what the opportunities were for recognition and reward. That message getting lost again.
So communication breakdowns, a common problem.
Very common. Both sites also reported facing difficulties in really nailing down how to accurately measure teaching contributions. And related to that, providing adequate performance appraisals and useful feedback for clinical teachers.
That's a tough nut to crack, isn't it? How do you truly quantify or even qualify good teaching in a way that's fair and meaningful?
It's incredibly complex, and perhaps most importantly, underpinning a lot of this, there was a significant shared belief across both Site 1 and Site 2, the new school and the old school, that because they were research-intensive institutions, teaching inherently ended up being valued less than research.
The classic hierarchy, research, teaching.
That seemed to be the perception. As one leader put it, there was a tendency to pay more attention to their publication and research more than actual teaching. This really points to a fundamental cultural challenge that exists in many, many academic medical centers globally.
Right. That pressure to publish, get grants. It often overshadows the time and effort needed for excellent teaching. Okay, so given all these challenges, structural, cultural, individual communication, what did the leaders suggest as potential ways to improve the situation? Again, I bet we saw some interesting differences in their proposed solutions.
We did, mirroring their diagnosis of the problems. Not surprisingly, given their focus on structural issues, Site 1 leaders really emphasized the need for improvements in, well, structure and process.
That makes sense. Like what specifically?
This included setting out clear and transparent criteria for what good teaching actually looks like, increasing the number and visibility of teaching awards available, and improving the systems for evaluation and feedback, making things clearer and more robust.
That earlier quote about transparency being key really reinforces this focus, doesn't it, if you make it clear?
Exactly. On the other hand, Site 2 leaders, whose concerns were more cultural and relational, well, their suggestions tended to center on improving communication and relationships, especially with the hospitals.
Mending fences, perhaps.
Something like that. And trying to foster a stronger sense of belonging for clinical teachers within the medical school. Practical suggestions included proactively reaching out to hospital leaders, like the chief of staff, and making sure important faculty information was included in hospital newsletters.
Getting the message out through their channels.
Right. There was also a focus on engaging clinicians more effectively, maybe by understanding and helping them achieve their own professional goals, aligning institutional support with individual aspirations.
That sounds more collaborative.
It does. But despite these different areas of primary focus, there were some common suggestions for improvement as well. Things both sites thought would help.
Okay, what were those?
Both sites recognized the need for better ways to measure and evaluate teaching that persistent challenge.
Yeah.
And crucially, finding ways to give teaching greater weight in promotion decisions.
Making it count more for career progression.
Exactly. And also recognizing it through more informal types of recognition, not just big awards, but simpler things.
Like what?
Even something as simple as thank you cards, personal notes of appreciation from leaders. Those small gestures were seen as potentially valuable in making teachers feel seen and valued.
Little things can mean a lot. Any other specific ideas?
Yeah, a couple more specific ones. Site 1 specifically suggested looking outwards, looking at what other universities are doing well internationally, learning from international benchmarks.
Benchmarking.
Yeah, and perhaps even involving external experts or panels in promotion decisions related to teaching to bring in outside perspective and credibility.
Interesting idea. And Site 2.
Site 2 proposed exploring different dedicated career pathways for clinicians that were more specifically focused on teaching activities, maybe like clinical educator tracks, similar to models used at other institutions with different levels of recognition for different types of teaching contributions.
Specialized tracks.
Exactly. They also mentioned sort of broadly the need to find strategies, maybe change management approaches to increase individual accountability and motivation among clinical teachers.
The issue they'd raised earlier.
Right. But the source didn't really detail the specifics of how they thought that could be achieved, just that it was needed.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways here for you, the listener? We've seen how two medical schools, quite different in age and location, are both grappling with this ongoing global issue of not always valuing clinical teaching as much as perhaps they should or could.
Yeah, and what's really insightful from this comparison is how it reveals the truly multifaceted nature of this problem. Definitely not just one simple thing we can point to and fix.
No quick fixes.
No. It's a complex interplay of how things are structured, the processes or lack thereof that are in place, and importantly, those underlying cultural norms and beliefs that contribute to this undervaluing. Structure, process, culture, all tangled up.
So what does all this mean for you, the learner, listening in? It really shines a light on the intricate web of factors that ultimately influence the quality of education you receive in crucial fields like the health sciences. These background issues really matter.
They absolutely do. And this raises a really important question, I think, for you to maybe mull over. Considering these findings, what role do you believe individual learners can actually play in advocating for and perhaps even recognizing excellent teaching within your own educational experiences?
Empowering the learner.
Maybe. Perhaps just by understanding these broader systemic challenges, the pressures teachers are under, the system limitations you can be more empowered to seek out, appreciate, and truly value those educators who are deeply committed to fostering and training the next generation of professionals, despite the hurdles.
That's a really powerful thought. It's not just about receiving, but also about recognizing and maybe even advocating. This deep dive has really just scratched the surface of this important research, of course.
Just a glimpse.
We really encourage you to explore the full study if you're interested, and maybe consider how these insights, the challenges, the potential solutions might be relevant in other fields too, anywhere where expertise and teaching come together.
Yeah, lots to think about beyond just medicine.